gender is just so complex and it's just incomprehensible to us personally, and we find it really weird and hard to understand how people try to categorize gender in just two boxes. It's to us personally, it's so insane. Hey y'all and everymany, thanks for switching into Housemates for Life, a podcast powered by Plurals for Plurals and everybody else who wants to hear more about the insanely awesome world of plurality. Here we talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful sides of sharing a body and mind. In this episode we talk about gender, because this is a very common topic for plurals, as not all members of a system are necessarily of the same gender, and not all might match up with the perceived gender of the body. We will discuss a bit about what gender actually means, how we personally perceive it, especially as a plural system, and why the discussion about gender is so important in today's society. We are the voices of just a rather very insane system, aka Jarvis. I'm your host Matt, and I'm not sure if I'm together with somebody here today. It's daytime. If you enjoy listening to our podcast Housemates for Life, please tell a friend or more and leave a like, subscribe, rate, comment, and everything else you do to show your support and appreciation. Many thanks. Now, without further ado, let's get on with our show. So the topic today, gender, is not necessarily a plural specific topic, but many plurals have a very colorful experience with gender, and so we think we should share some of our insights from our multi-perspective. I'm gonna preface this that we have a bias in this topic, because we're natural scientists in a way, and we also briefly studied and researched sexual reproduction, so we have a very biased scientific perspective on the topic, and we sometimes even run into conflicting discussions sometimes with people who have more a background in sociology or greater interest in the social and cultural aspects of the topic, which we do respect. But yeah, I think we should also share our view, our opinion here. And so to start this episode, we should talk about how we understand gender, what gender is not, as a basis of this episode, discussion, whatever. So what gender is not biological sex, okay? And the way we personally understand biological sex is very, very technical, given our background. So when we think about biological sex, we usually only think of it in terms of gametes. Gametes are like these tiny little cells that are involved in reproduction. So for humans, that would be egg and sperm. But that's just humans. I mean, the world out there is wild. And so when we think about sexual reproduction, you really have to think about what is actually really reproducing there. And in essence, it's the DNA. The DNA is what gets copied, and only the DNA that is contained in these two tiny little cells that meet each other. So every other cell who doesn't get matched up with other gametes goes to waste, basically. They're not reproducing, and so in essence, how we think about it is that the human body, or in general any body, multicellular organism, is in essence just a vessel of these tiny little cells. So you could also think about mushrooms. The mushroom that is sticking out from the ground is in essence just a vessel to spread spores, and what is actually really reproducing in the mushroom are these spores landing somewhere on the fertile ground and reproducing either by asexual reproduction or some fungi do have sex. Fungi sex exists. It's wild. And so this leads us to think about, what does gender actually really mean in this biological context, for example. And basically our bodies, our physiological body is extremely complex. So everything around that tiny little cell, all that physiology is based on genetic expression, which is such a huge, complex and process that is still not really understood in biology to its all extent. And then you have environmental influences, and you have the intersex spectrum, which is so vast and broad and diverse. And then put sociology on top of it, right? Your culture has evolved over thousands of years, and psychology of the human mind is even more complex. And so how we conclude this is, gender is just so complex. Like everything that contributes to whatever people perceive as gender is so vast, and it's just incomprehensible to us personally, and we find it really weird and hard to understand how people try to categorize gender in just 2 boxes. It's, to us personally, it's so insane. But yeah, unfortunately, the vast majority would call people insane who think otherwise, who think there must be a 3rd gender or multiple genders, blah, 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 blah. The discussion goes on and on and on, and we are just sitting on the outside munching popcorn and be like, what the fuck? What the fuck is going on? So this is where we stand. This is our position in this whole thing, and yeah, we just try to tell you a bit about our observations throughout life, because this topic has been on our mind for a while. So now, how do we actually understand this vast, complex gender spectrum? And the way we try to get our head around it is that we move from biology, now we move to quantum physics. And basically, it's impossible to exactly define a gender. So, like, putting a label on it and say, this is the one gender or whatever. But we can kind of talk about it in terms of probabilities, which they do in quantum physics. You have a particle that you can't measure its position or speed at the same time. You can't really define the particle like you classically would with objects, but you can describe it in terms of probabilities, probability of its position, probability of its speed, and so on. So as we imagine it, the gender spectrum, we imagine it as this landscape, okay? There's a landscape that models the spectrum of traits that society or individuals associate with gender, which we have established as super, super complex. And when you look at it from the outside, from far away, you can see 2 mountains on this landscape. So from the outside, it appears to us there is this binary landscape with 2 significant points, let's say. And when you are somewhere on this landscape, on this gender spectrum landscape, and the closer you get to a mountain, the higher your position, the higher is the probability that the gender aligns with that mountain. So, for example, some person might prefer a certain clothing style that aligns with what is culturally considered as male or female. And then you could say with high probability that person is male or female. But that landscape, keep in mind that landscape is so complex, and it's not just a two-dimensional landscape. It has so many different dimensions, and it's so individual to every person. And these mountains I'm talking about, there are no mountain tops, you know, they don't exist. It's like there isn't this one defined man or woman. There isn't like all people are different, and there's no two men or two women are exactly the same. So this mountain top doesn't actually really exist. It's just a metaphor, okay? And so exactly like quantum states, we cannot know a person's gender. We can't measure it. And yeah, we only know what they can tell us. We have to believe that. And in essence, what I'm trying to say is every being is an instance of possibilities. Nothing more and nothing less. So now that we have some of the terminology and the basis where we're coming from out of the way, let's talk a bit about our personal experiences, especially our personal experiences as a plural system in context of gender. And I think this part my headmate should take over. I'm not sure if I can draw him out now, because I feel very alone at the front right now, but we will see. Let's see. Will, are you there? I can try. We can try to front. It's been a busy day. We've been recovering from sickness, if you can't tell from our voice, but let's see if I can get grounded for this. Okay. We've written up some notes, so that helps. I think it came across from what Matt has told before that we always struggle to understand gender and gender roles, especially. We never really understood the need for binary terminology. We still don't really understand the need for binary terminology. I mean, we get it to some degree. It's been this historically, culturally grown concept, and now it affects our current society and lives and the way we communicate with each other, but that's as far as we understand it. And the thing is that we as a system, so we have all sorts of genders in our system. So some of us are clearly male, some are clearly female, and some are like actually non-binary in their own individual experience. And here's a little anecdote from our life before we knew about our system. So I personally, I usually feel extremely dysphoric about being called a woman or female or whatever, and then I would get really pissed off and angry in the past. I mean, still, but this is a story from the past, so past tense. So I would get upset. Somebody calls me a woman, I'm going to be mad, I'm going to be upset. But then our headmate Jen would often switch in because she would express that anger. She's more comfortable with outwardly expressing anger on the outside. So she would come in, I get angry, she comes in on my behalf and then would be angry about being called a woman, but then in the next second be like, her. But yeah, actually I am a woman, so why am I so angry about this? I don't understand. And this would happen all the time, and like we have some handmaids who feel comfortable with being perceived as female, even though they don't understand themselves as female, or somebody like Matt, for example, who is clearly a guy, but he really doesn't give a shit about what other people think of him, and he doesn't think about it too much. So it totally goes under your radar. Well, like, we totally never really thought about what is our specific gender. Like, I mean, clearly it always affected our life, but it was never really clear or perceivable to us in that way. So the result is that we have always been confused about what's actually the fuss about gender. Like, why does it exist, and why is it so important to society, to people? We don't understand. We still don't really understand. And we always thought that all people feel this way, all people perceive it that way, and all people think about it that way. But yeah, that was really naive and of us to think like that. So here are some of our observations. So, I mean, clearly there's no inherent meaning to what constitutes a man or a woman. There are tall women, there are short men, there are muscular women, there are skinny men, there are girls who like the sports and boys who like arts or whatever. Like, all these stereotypes, they apply to all people. It doesn't really have to do with gender. I mean, I guess you can make some statistics and there might be some biases, but inherently there is no meaning to all of this. And even so, and if you ask people, most people, even people who perceive themselves as cisgenders, who their gender matches their biological sex, most people would agree there are no inherent gender roles, or gender roles are obsolete and whatsoever. But still there is a perceivable difference somehow that we struggle to understand. Like, we as a system, but also I guess we as a society struggle to understand this. So for example, we have this synesthesia, right? So one part of our synesthesia is that we, like, letters and numbers to us have genders, actually. Like, we perceive them as colors, but also they have distinct personalities, they have relationships between each other, and they have a gender. Each of these letters and numbers has a gender we can inherently perceive somehow. And I guess this comes from how we learn it from society, but still it's there. There's this, I don't know, call it a sixth sense or something like that, that gives you an internal impression of, or internal feeling of gender. I don't know. And it confuses us so much, because why does it exist? What's it good for? I don't know. And this question has always been on our mind. So we thought about gender a lot throughout our life, because we always felt so different than girls or women our age. And we would always feel, or especially I guess, like, judging from hindsight, I would feel extremely uncomfortable. I would feel extremely fake around girls or women later in life. And I would always think they feel the same. They feel like uncomfortable and fake, and yet still smiling, laughing, talking to each other and pretending, quote unquote, pretending to enjoy this. You know, I was the one who wasn't enjoying it, and I thought the others would also not enjoy it, but apparently they do, and I don't get it. and apparently talking to other people later, I mean, I didn't ask them when I was a teenager, but later in life, asking girls and women, apparently most of them don't wish to be born as a boy. So I thought everybody wishes that. I mean, quote unquote, obviously it's better, right? But yeah, apparently that's not a very common experience which we only learn later in life. But yeah, such is life, I guess. And I would always wonder, what is it that makes a person feminine or masculine? Because to our mind, it just doesn't have nothing to do with gender, right? Like, you can be a woman and be masculine. You can be man and be perceived as feminine. And I just don't understand why it's so strongly connected when we talk about gender. Why we talk about feminine and masculine when they are just some character traits. I don't get it. It's like all these things, kindness, vulnerability, being of a caring nature, these are all human qualities and they're not feminine. Like, why? What does it mean? In a way, I always had the better understanding of what it means to be masculine, or it was easier to pinpoint masculine characteristics or behavior. But all the time I was like, what the fuck? What is it that what is femininity? Like, on one end I can perceive it as a character trait, but when I try to define it, it's so difficult. And I struggled to understand, and especially struggled to connect with it for so long. We, for a long time, we thought we live with internalized misogyny, like negative beliefs about girls and womanhood and blah, blah, blah. And we actually worked really hard to get rid of these beliefs. We tried so hard to connect with what's supposed to be us. But yeah, we failed. We failed so much, so long. And only really later in life, like after like almost 30 years of our life struggling with this, we finally understood ourselves through the non-binary gender identity, or identities. There are many different ways of being non-binary, as there are many different ways of being male or female. And actually, first we dismissed non-binary as this, I don't know, political movement for the obvious. Like, to us, it was always obvious that gender is not binary, so we thought it's clear to everyone and everymany, and apparently then some people think, yeah, let's make a political movement out of this and break up like gender roles in society. But then it actually, at some point, it clicked with us that there's more to non-binary gender identities when we heard a trans person say that they don't understand the non-binary gender identities. And we're like, wait, why not? I mean, you're a transgender person. You have a very distinct experience of gender than most people do. So why do you not understand the obvious? How can you not understand this? And then, yeah, we also had to let it sink in that not all people dislike being female or perceived as feminine. And some people even go through hell and back to express themselves as female or feminine. And really never really thought about it before, but yeah, there are people who identify as woman and as feminine or whatever, and they're okay with that. And I'm not. And I had to realize that. And this was all still before discovering our system. So we first identified as non-binary, like read more about things like gender fluid. Gender fluid was what we would call ourselves collectively as a system, since we switched gender. But when we started to come out as non-binary, like really briefly after that, I started to really refuse the non-binary label. I was like, no, I'm not non-binary. I'm I'm clearly male. I wouldn't call myself masculine at all. But I'm clearly male. Like, I don't know, it's this internal gender perception that I have of myself, of my identity. And I want to be perceived as that, and I don't want to be perceived as non-binary. But still, in some days, it was totally okay. My head majority even identifies as non-binary, as an individual, or more specifically as agender, so it doesn't really perceive any real gender identity for itself, even though she aligns more with being female or being embodied in a biologically female person, human. And so on some days it was okay, and on others I was like, fuck off. And that's kind of like what got us think more deeply about our identities and uncovering our system, this and that. We have episodes about this. Check them out. So our conclusion from all of these experiences is that there's clearly a difference in the internal perception of our gender identities. We can't explain it, but it's there, it's perceivable to us, and obviously also to many other people out there, because otherwise we wouldn't talk about this in our society all the fucking time. And so with the discovery of our system, we basically started to understand the difference between the non-binary gender spectrum that we perceive, but also on that spectrum we still have, or we can have, very clearly binary identities. So both coexist in this same very complex spectrum. So we as the collective system, we are non-binary. Individuals of our system are non-binary, but also individuals of our system, including myself, are clearly we fall on one of these binary mountains of that gender landscape that we tried to describe previously. And one more remark is that to us personally, gender is not the same as, I don't know, we call it energy or characteristic. So male or female is not the same as feminine or masculine, which unfortunately gets associated together so much, which, oh geez, I could make a whole episode just ranting about terminology used to describe gender. Pisses me off so much. But yeah, gender has nothing to do with whether you're feminine or masculine or whatever. So for example, our headmate Jen is 100% a woman. She perceives herself as a woman. She has no dysphoria about her body or whatever. But she is clearly so much more masculine than all the rest of our system together. And she's not the only one, right? Like, we always perceived it. To us, it was always clear, yeah, women can be so much more masculine than any man. And vice versa. There's so many men. We know so many of our friends are male, are way more feminine. We always perceive them as way more feminine than ourselves. And to us, this was so normal. It was, you don't have to talk about it. It's just so clear and natural. And we don't get why these characteristics get mixed up or associated so strongly with gender. Could pull out all my hair, oh my gosh. And then don't get us started on sexual or romantic attraction, okay? We would need an entire own episode for this, because I mean, if the gender spectrum is so complex, then all of ways you can be attracted to people and genders is so much more complex than that. And yeah, have a look at the split attraction model, which is often referred to in the A-spec community, so asexual and aromantic people. I guess we will make another episode of that, because the A-spec needs so much more representation out there in the queer community alone, and even outside this queer spaces. It's ridiculous. Too much work. Also plural representation. Gosh, this whole topic gets me worked up so much, and I guess you can get why in the next part of this episode. So, Matt, would you like to do that last part? Do you think you can do that? Well, the question is probably more, can I keep silent about this? Let's try. Thank you for sharing your experience or our experience. I mean, there's a whole lot more to it, as I have my own different experience and relationship with gender, but yeah, that would just blow up the scope of this episode. This is Matt, by the way, if this wasn't clear. We switched. Or tried. I would try to talk about the next topic. Hopefully Will is not going to hijack the front. So what's the fuss about gender? If it's so complex and so vast and so individual for everyone and everymany, then why do people hold on to the binary so badly? I mean, yeah, we get that. There is this whole social aspect, very difficult, even more complex and difficult than the gender spectrum itself. But here are some of our takes and maybe suggestions. I don't know. We're no experts, but I guess we have our own expertise and our own experience, so let's go. So first of all, we wonder, why do we talk about gender groups so much? Why do we keep talking about gender groups? So in a statement that you make about politics or social cultural experience, you may ask yourself, is it really important to know the gender demographic of a group? Does it add any more information to your statement or not? And like, when is it useful to include the gender demographic? Or when might it be harmful if you talk about a gender group? Does it maybe perpetuate statements about a gender group that harm this group instead of actually helping the discussion to move forward? And we often stumble across statements or arguments where people talk about men this and that, or women this and that, and then with this little added side note, but of course not all of them. And then we wonder, why can't we just talk a bit differently about the topic? Why can't we say instead, like, why can't we first of all treat people as people and talk about them as people who this and that? And then if you deem it necessary, you could add in a side note, and a large proportion of this group are women, or a large proportion of this group who this and that are men. You can say that if it's important to your statement, but like, yeah, instead of generalizing and then making amends to your statement, you can first just talk about people, because we all are just people, and then, if necessary, really necessary, specify the like, characterize or specify more in detail the group of people that you're talking about. And yeah, and another reason why we do this episode here, why we think it's so important is, and this whole thing, this whole topic actually would deserve its own episode or an entire podcast on its own, because there's so much to talk about. But yeah, we don't have the time and energy for this. But yeah, here's a little bit of a take from us. First of all, being transgender and also being plural is not an illness or a disorder, or there's nothing wrong with people because they perceive their gender a bit differently than the majority maybe does. So some people just don't perfectly align with one of the two mountains on the complex gender landscape, and that's totally okay. And I don't know, there's why people would assume there's something wrong with it, because it seems so natural to us that, yeah, it's a complex spectrum, it's a complex landscape, so wherever you find people, you just find them there. And if we would all sit on the same mountain, it would get crammed, right? Like, let's just appreciate that we all spread out a bit on the landscape. And the next important thing that applies to both transgender people and especially for plural people also, every human being deserves agency over their body. We are strong advocates of that, because we feel that very strongly when people talk about transgender people, and then you can extrapolate it to plurals. We are basically denied our making decisions over our body. We are denied to get the treatment that we want or that we deem fit for ourselves. So yeah, we get that. It's a complex and can be a very confusing journey. To some people it's extremely clear from the very beginning, but to a lot of people, and nobody would deny that, a lot of people struggle with their identity or their gender identity and would love to have more help and support, information, counseling, and all that. We don't say no to help. It's just, don't gatekeep people and don't deny them the care and treatment just because it's too complex, or just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that people themselves understand it very clearly. And we're not just saying this out of spite or rage or whatever. This is real life. This is really happening right now. Still, it's summer 2023 and it's still happening that people who seek help or treatment for their transgender identity, or even people with DID or just plural in general, and then being told, now we need to first carefully really check your mental health. This can't be this can't be real, or like, people often don't have that sentiment, not being openly offensive or discriminating, but in the back of their mind the perception is you want treatment for your gender, you want gender affirming healthcare. Wait a second, we first need to put you through years and years of psychotherapy because obviously something is wrong with you or something like that. Obviously there's nothing wrong with these people. These people need help. We need help. But at the same time, we are the ones who decide what happens to this body, and we don't want to be gatekept. We don't want to be told what to do or not to do. We want counseling, we want help, we want professionals who are actually trained for this, okay? A lot of professionals admit that they have not the necessary information or education to provide people with the accurate treatment, which is totally fine and cool that they admit that. But at the same time, what does the government even do to promote educating professionals? Like, they say you need to go to a professional to get checked, but at the same time there are no professionals who are educated on this. It's insane. I don't know if you can tell, but this is like Matt and Will. We are like switching back and forth and blending, and we get very passionate about this topic, as you can tell. So yeah, we are strong advocates of establishing plural rights, okay? Like, plural rights in a legal form that really manifests something about one's or many's own self or self's concept and agency over the body. everyone and everymany would benefit from these kind of plural rights if they were manifested legally somehow. But most people don't even know that plurals exist and that plurality is a thing, so we have still such a long way to go. And if you want to support us on that way, just leave a like, share, and distribute this podcast. It's a tiny step, but it's a step forward. We want to believe that. And this is the end of this episode, this very passionate, loaded with emotion episode. I hope you enjoyed it. We hope you enjoyed it. We talked about gender, how we perceive gender and the gender spectrum from our very narrow and biased perspective as, for one, as natural scientists and as a plural system. We talked a tiny little bit of our personal experience, so there's too much to cover about gender in just one episode, but yeah, I think you got the idea. And this is a good opportunity for you as our audience. Share your experiences, whether you're singular or plural, whether you're transgender, cisgender, non-binary, whatever, however where you find yourself on the complex landscape of gender. Tell us about your experiences, your opinions, your views. They all matter, no matter what. This episode was brought to you by the Voices of Jarvis, with me, Matt, as your host, with my handmaid Will here today also. Thank you all beautiful souls for listening and your support. If you enjoyed this episode and think it brought a little bit of value to your life, please tell a friend or more, leave a like, subscribe, rate, comment, and all the other good things that you do to show your support and appreciation. Many thanks. And as I always like to say, let your personality shine brighter than your eyes and your confidence shout louder than your voice. Until next time with Housemates for Life.